Okay, while this is going on, I'll go ahead and get started. So thank you, and I'm Larston Harden. I'm Senior Technology Advisor to the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund, which is a $1.5 billion fund that was, let me go ahead and pull up my slides until you get there. So it's a 10-year, $1.5 billion grant program that's focused on advancing wireless, open wireless technology. Specifically, we are really focused on creating open, interoperable, and secure networks for our customers, for our country, and for other countries indeed. It was funded by the CHIPS Act, and so that was a very large funding, and we're part of that. So the question would be, why do we care about open networks? Well, obviously, and it's been great, the slides, there we go. It's been great to talk so far because it just led right into this. In fact, I could just walk through my slides very quickly and we'll be done. But the question is, what is the present ecosystem for mobile wireless? And that's a very closed system. There are a handful of vendors that have closed networks, both 4G and 5G in the process. And some of them are, we consider, insecure networks. So how do we solve that problem? Well, the problem is a diverse supply chain. And the way to do that is by breaking those molds and creating an open network for people to use where everyone can build products into that network. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with Open RAN, is to transition beyond this monolithic structure of a network. So how do we do that? Well, we promote 5G technologies. We'll talk about how we're doing that in a minute. We want to advance the deployment of those within all of our networks. We want to support that through both multiple bands as well as multiple vendors in the process and the critical elements. So as we move on, let's talk about what we're doing. So first thing you're going to see is a thing called NOFO. So let's talk about NOFO is Notice of Funding Opportunity. So I'll use NOFO from now on, but that's what it means. And what we have done is we have created several, in fact, 2 so far, Notice of Funding Opportunities and more to come. The first one, and these were informed, let me talk about that. They were informed by a lot of work we did, reaching out to industry, reaching out to partner countries, reaching out and saying, what do you need out of this? And the first big one was testing evaluation. We'll talk about that more in just a moment. The second one, which is open right now, is a little over $400 million offering for hardware and supply chain, specifically open RUs in the process, and we'll talk about how that's structured in 2 ways. The next one, which we're already working on, I go back to DC next week and start working on NOFO 3, and that is going to be more around software in the network. And finally, there will be more beyond this, but we're still working on NOFO 3, so we'll get there. The other thing down here that we want to talk about a minute is this concept of how do you create a diversified supply chain? Well, you need new vendors in that process. Well, the problem exists in telecom is anybody that wants to enter that space is at a disadvantage compared to the present suppliers. The present suppliers have worked for decades with the carriers and know the carriers' requirements in detail. If I'm entering this market from, let's say, an adjacent market, I don't have that opportunity. So what the NTIA has done in conjunction with Addis and other member companies of Addis is work in the U.S. on a minimum viable profile, which is tell me, if I'm a new vendor, what the feature function set of my product has to be to get the AT&Ts and Vodafones, Singtels of the world to be interested in this product. Because as we look at Open RAN, one of the things that's happening is we have what we generally call a refresh cycle in networks. Every 5 years or so, major network operators sign new contracts for products. Generally falls in line with the 3GPP standards, such as we've got 5G right now, 5G Advanced is coming, so the next refresh cycle will be in the 2022-2027 timeframe. We need to know that we can get products available to the carriers at that time so they can consider them for their refresh cycle. This MVP is one of those areas where we're helping vendors understand what those products need to do, not only from a feature function, but a performance standpoint. And that will continue to work in the process, and then there'll be obviously some vetting between U.S. or North American MVP, European MVP that's out there, Asian MVPs. That'll happen in that process, perhaps under one of standards organizations. But that's what we're trying to do as far as making this market more available to vendors in the process. So let's talk about NOFO 1, very quick terms. As I said, 76% of the people that responded said interoperability testing was a very big problem, that we didn't know how, that ORAN interoperability testing was a challenge. And certainly we faced that with the 5G challenge that Dr. Rondeau mentioned. And it still is an issue that's coming up, whether it be in ORAN Alliance or elsewhere. So we funded 2 different areas. The first area was funding, in this case, 3 labs, large labs, to be able to provide interoperability testing for Open RAN that could help lead those to product development, product availability for customers. The other was research areas in how do we advance some of those sorts of testing methodologies for the future in the process. And in fact, DeepSig is here as one of the awardees in that area. So here's the award. It was $140.4 million, 3 labs, Dish, who's represented here today, Viavi, and then a consortium with AT&T, Verizon, Docomo, and Jio, as well as a number of other companies in the process. Then we have these other areas of research. So let me explain that the research generally is a period of performance of 3 to 5 years, while we look at the labs as a shorter period of performance, so they come up and are operating very quickly to move this market forward. So that's just the general view of things that we awarded in NOFO 1. So let's go to NOFO 2. This is the one where everybody's interested right now. And remember, I do not have $1.5 billion. That is the fund itself. So we have 2 areas that we call research areas, specific research areas. The first one is ORAN, ORU commercialization. This meets that first target that we're talking about, having product ready for the next buying cycle. And the funding range, as you see, is 25 to 45 million per. And eligibility, the interesting thing about this, we looked at this and say, how do we can talk about RUs a lot, and we can talk about the development, but how do we talk about commercialization? And here's what we've done in the process, is that the RU supplier is the lead in this process, but they have to have an NO partner to be part of this process. And they have to have the other thing I really want to talk about really is that they have to have a commercialization plan. So when we look at the applications that come in, one of the things we're trying to do is say, can this get to that point that carriers could be willing to consider it during their next refresh cycle? What the carriers choose to do, we don't control. But if we can solve those technical problems, those issues that have been brought up, whether it be performance parity or management plane integration, any of those sort of things, that's what we hope to see done in this part of the NOFO. The second part of the NOFO, you'll see there are, I believe it is 5 research areas in there. You're welcome to go online to grants.gov, and you'll see this application. It's a period of performance of 5 years with funding ranges from $5 to $10 million. It is trying to address some of the things, including Dr. Rondeau mentioned distributed MIMO, I think is one of the areas that we've talked about in there. So there are areas that we want to make sure that Open RAN stays abreast and moves forward with how the industry is changing as well. We can't have a singular target here. We have to make sure that it evolves with the industry. So that's why we have that structured in that manner. So yeah, and I know there'll be some one-on-one sessions. There'll be some capability of asking questions too. So. And finally, so let's talk about what it is. $1.5 billion sounds like a whole lot of money. But when you know that carriers spend $5 billion a year on CapEx, between $3 and $5 billion a year, and that original equipment manufacturers spend $3 billion plus on research every year, this is $1.5 billion over 10 years. So understand that it's not as big as it sounds. So what we're trying to do is target areas where we can close gaps, become a catalyst to accelerate this. We're not going to overcome this just by ourselves. We look at those areas, we've done gap analysis, say where can we inject funds that can close gaps to make this more viable for carriers. And it's everyone in the process has been remarkably supportive of this initiative. There have been a lot of applications. We expect a lot of applications come in July 10th, U.S. time when they come in. Our goal continues to be a diverse and competitive supply chain. That was one of the things that was mentioned in the previous talk was I have been here to Taiwan as well before, and I do find that it is a very interesting group of competitors in this market because they're competitors, but they also share in the process. And certainly some of the competitors here have won prizes during our 5G challenge. So we think this is a really good market that is an example of how this can continue to grow in the U.S. and elsewhere. One of the things that Dr. Rundo mentioned, and it's mentioned everywhere, is security is an issue. So we need to address that, and you'll see, by example, in Working Group 11 of O-RAN Alliance, there's been a whole lot of very good work done in the idea of a zero-trust architecture and how to apply that. I think they're leading the way more so than 3GPP in many respects. So when you're looking at this process, security is also going to be an issue as well. I don't know if we've got do we want to take questions or we want to toot that later? Okay, well, you got questions? I'm here for the next 4 days. Please ask. Thank you.